Have you ever felt like the universe was playing some cruel joke on you? Like it had placed in front of you the perfect person? Someone who awakens feelings in you that you didn't even know existed. Someone who seems custom-made for your soul. And then, cruelly, makes it impossible for you to be together. Maybe she's committed to someone else. Maybe she lives on the other side of the world. Maybe she simply doesn't feel even half of what you feel for her. And there you are, wondering why the hell fate was so sadistic as to show you paradise and then slam the door in your face. Today, I'm going to reveal something that Carl Jung discovered about these impossible encounters. Because maybe, just maybe, the universe isn't as cruel as you think. Maybe it's being the greatest teacher you've ever had, disguised as the deepest pain you've ever felt. Watch until the end, because what I'm about to tell you can transform this seemingly meaningless suffering into the most important experience of your life. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, hit subscribe now, because here we dive deep into the mysteries of the human soul. No surface-level stuff, no cookie-cutter formulas, just raw truth about how life really works. You might wonder why I bring up these complex topics so often, relationships that don't work out but leave their mark on the soul. The truth is, I talk about this because I lived through something like this myself, in a way that completely changed my understanding of love, of destiny, of the invisible laws that govern our deepest connections. And I genuinely believe my experience can help in your evolution. I met her at a bookstore where she worked. I remember it like it was yesterday. Between the shelves and the smell of fresh pages, we started talking. I realized Jung was right when he talked about synchronicity. That seemingly random encounter. And what's most curious is that with every word, I discovered we had the same interests, the same aspirations, as if our minds walked side by side effortlessly. It was rare, almost impossible to find someone I had so much in common with. There was an inexplicable chemistry, an ease of communication, moments when our thoughts seemed synchronized in an almost mystical way. Over time, this connection only became more evident. But there was one detail I couldn't ignore. She had been married for 5 years. And no matter how much something inside me screamed that she was special, I never allowed myself to cross that line. I always maintained a respectful distance, never crossed any boundaries, never even mentioned what I felt. Not out of cowardice, but because there's something in me that has always respected limits, that has always valued integrity above personal desire. She had a life, a commitment, a story I had no right to interfere with, even though my heart silently screamed otherwise. For months I rebelled against fate. Why had the universe placed this woman in front of me if it was impossible for anything to flourish between us? Why awaken such deep feelings if there was no possible future? I felt like the protagonist of a Greek tragedy, condemned to love someone I could never have. And it was during this period of rebellion and questioning that I found Carl Jung's studies on encounters that seem like chance, but carry deep meanings. About people who enter our lives not to stay, but to transform us in ways we could never have imagined possible. Throughout this time, watching her from a distance, admiring her intelligence, her sensitivity, the way she handled the most complex situations with a serenity that fascinated me, I began to perceive something revolutionary. All the qualities that most attracted me to her were aspects of myself that I had repressed over the years. Her ability to really listen to people, her sharp intuition, her way of finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. I had become an overly rational man, controlled, disconnected from my own sensitivity, because I believed these characteristics were signs of weakness in the corporate world. Jung realized what most of us take a lifetime to understand. Not every meaningful encounter was meant to materialize into a relationship. Some come to awaken, others to heal, still others to force us into an evolution that would never happen if things were easy. He called these archetypal encounters, moments when our soul encounters aspects of itself reflected in another person, aspects that need to be integrated, developed, made conscious. And often, for this integration to happen in a deep and true way, it's necessary for the encounter to be impossible, for the person to remain unattainable, for you to be forced to seek within yourself what you were projecting onto them. Think with me for a moment. How many people do you know who found the love of their life when they were very young, and, for that very reason, never fully developed their individuality, never learned to be whole by themselves, never went through the painful but necessary process of deeply knowing themselves? They can be happy, of course, but there's a dimension of personal growth that remains dormant when everything is too easy from the start. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, sometimes needs to deny us what we most desire to force us to develop what we most need. When you meet someone you can't be with, but for whom you feel an inexplicable connection, you're being confronted with what Jung called the anima or animus, your psychological counterpart of the opposite sex, that part of you that carries characteristics, qualities, and potentials that haven't been fully developed yet. If you're a man and fall head over heels for an unattainable woman, she might be mirroring feminine aspects of yourself that need to be integrated. Your sensitivity, your intuition, your ability to connect with the emotional, your creativity. If you're a woman and find yourself obsessed with a man you can't have, maybe he's reflecting your inner strength, your leadership capacity, your determination, masculine aspects of your psyche that haven't fully blossomed yet. The pain you feel when you can't be with this person isn't just romantic rejection pain. It's the pain of the soul that recognized an opportunity to become more complete, more whole, more integrated, but was prevented from losing itself in the illusion that completeness comes from outside. And that's exactly where the cruel wisdom of the universe lies. It shows you what you need to develop, but forces you to do it internally, alone, through the most difficult process that exists, which is growing through pain. It took me years to understand this in practice. After that encounter at the bookstore, I spent months idealizing that woman, creating fantasies about what our life together would be like, imagining impossible scenarios where she left everything and came looking for me. I had created a version of her in my mind that had much more to do with me than with who she really was. And the more I lost myself in these fantasies, the more I distanced myself from myself, the more I avoided looking within and understanding what that encounter was really trying to teach me. It was only when the obsession became unbearable that I finally sought help. A Jungian therapist asked me a question that changed everything. What exactly do you admire about this woman that you'd like to develop in yourself? At first, the question irritated me. I didn't want to develop anything in myself, I wanted her. But as I reflected, I began to realize that all the qualities that most attracted me to her, I had abandoned in myself over the years. Her lightness, her spontaneity, her connection to the sensory world, her ability to be moved by small things. I had become a hard man, rational, disconnected from my own sensitivity, because I believed these characteristics were signs of weakness. And then I began to understand what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, that long and often painful process of becoming who we really are, integrating all aspects of our personality, including those that were repressed, denied, or forgotten. That woman hadn't entered my life to become my girlfriend. She had entered to show me parts of myself that I had lost along the way, to force me into a reconnection with my own soul. But intellectual realization is just the first step. Emotional integration is much more complex. For months, I oscillated between rationally understanding what was happening and losing myself again in longing, fantasy, rebellion against fate. There were days when I woke up with total clarity about the purpose of that encounter, and others when all I could feel was the raw pain of loss, impossibility, cosmic injustice. Jung understood that psychological transformation isn't a linear process. It's a spiral, where you revisit the same themes at increasingly deeper levels of understanding, and impossible encounters work exactly like this. You think you've already understood, already overcome, already learned the lesson, and then something reminds you of that person and all the intensity returns. Not because you haven't evolved, but because there are still deeper layers of the experience to be processed and integrated. One of the hardest things to accept in these encounters is that the other person may not have been affected the same way. While you're going through an internal revolution, she can continue her life normally, without even imagining the impact she caused. This generates a sense of injustice, of asymmetry that can be devastating to the ego. How is it possible that something so significant to you is irrelevant to her? But Jung reminds us that each person is in their own timing of development. What's transformative for you now may not be for her. She may be living other lessons, other challenges, other growth processes that have nothing to do with you. And this is one of the hardest and most important lessons of these impossible encounters. Accepting that you're not the center of everyone's story who touches your life. You can be deeply impacted by someone who doesn't even remember you. And this doesn't diminish the validity or importance of your experience, it just puts it in the correct context. It's not about correspondence, it's about growth. It's not about reciprocity, it's about personal evolution. Over time, I began to notice subtle but profound changes in the way I related to myself and the world. The sensitivity I had admired in that woman began to blossom in me. I started getting emotional again with music, movies, simple moments of daily life. The spontaneity she had began to manifest in my choices, I became less calculating, less controlling. The connection she had with the sensory world awakened in me a new appreciation for beauty, art, nature. It wasn't an easy or quick process. There was internal resistance, fear of being judged for showing this sensitivity, concern that these characteristics might be seen as weakness by others. But as I integrated these aspects, I realized they didn't weaken me, they completed me. I continued being rational and determined, but now I was also sensitive and intuitive. I hadn't lost anything. I had gained dimensions of my personality that were dormant. And then, something interesting began to happen. Other people started appearing in my life. People who were attracted to this more complete version of myself. Relationships that flowed with much more naturalness, because I was no longer trying to find in others what I needed to develop in myself. I could love without desperation, connect without dependency, give myself without losing myself. This doesn't mean I stopped feeling nostalgia for that woman from the bookstore. Even today, years later, there's a special tenderness when I think of her. A deep gratitude for having been the catalyst for such an important transformation. But the quality of this feeling has completely changed. It's no longer pain, it's recognition. It's no longer neediness, it's honor. She continues being special to me not because I want to have her, but because through her I found myself again. Jung talked about a phenomenon he called conscious love, a way of loving that transcends possession, need, emotional dependency. It's when you can love someone for the very experience of loving, for the expansion it generates in you, for the growth it provides regardless of reciprocity or possibility of relationship. It's a love that demands nothing in return, because it has already fulfilled its main function. It transformed you. And that's exactly what impossible encounters teach us. They force us to develop conscious love, because there's no other option. You can't possess the person, you can't manipulate circumstances, you can't force a happy ending in the traditional sense. All you can do is love consciously. Allow that love to transform you, and be grateful for the gift that was receiving this opportunity for growth, even if disguised as loss. But there's another aspect of these encounters that Jung explored deeply. The question of destiny versus free will. When something as improbable as a deep encounter with someone unattainable happens, it's natural to question whether this is part of a bigger plan, whether there are forces operating beyond our conscious understanding. Jung believed in synchronicity, those moments when apparently disconnected events align meaningfully, suggesting an organizing intelligence behind apparent reality. Maybe you went to that party you didn't want to go to and met someone who shook all your internal structures. Maybe you missed a flight and, in the departure lounge, had a 5-minute conversation with someone who awakened feelings you didn't even know you could still feel. Maybe you moved to a new city and, on the first day, bumped into someone who turned your world upside down. These impossible coincidences that result in transformative encounters are rarely truly random. Jung believed there are moments in our personal development journey where we need specific catalysts, and the universe conspires for these encounters to happen exactly when we're ready for the growth they provide. Not necessarily consciously ready. Often we resist with all our strength, but ready at a deeper level of the soul. And maybe that's exactly why these people are unattainable. If it were easy to be with them, maybe there wouldn't be growth. Maybe we'd settle into the comfort zone of the relationship, satisfied with superficial connection, never being forced to dive into the depths of self-knowledge that these experiences provide when lived in their impossibility. I often think about all the people who crossed my life generating this same intensity. The college professor I fell madly in love with, knowing any involvement would be inappropriate and impossible. The coworker who awakened deep feelings in me, but who was in a serious relationship. The friend I met on a trip who lived on the other side of the world, with whom I felt a connection that transcended any logical explanation. Each of these people brought something unique, awakened different aspects of my personality, forced me to grow in directions I would never have explored alone. And the pattern was always the same. Deep recognition, intense connection, practical impossibility, initial pain, rebellion against destiny, and finally, after much suffering and resistance, understanding of the greater purpose of the experience. Each of these encounters was a masterclass on different aspects of the human condition, on parts of myself that needed to be developed, integrated, made conscious. Jung said that what we don't bring to consciousness manifests in our lives as destiny. And maybe that's exactly what happens with these impossible encounters. There are aspects of ourselves that are dormant, repressed, denied, and they manifest in the form of these unattainable people who awaken in us a longing for something we don't even really know what it is. A longing for ourselves, for undeveloped potentials, for parts of our soul that were forgotten along the way. The woman you fell madly in love with but can't have might be mirroring your own repressed femininity, your sensitivity, your intuition, your ability to flow with life instead of trying to control it. The man who awakens overwhelming feelings in you but remains unattainable might be reflecting your own inner strength, your leadership capacity, your determination, aspects you haven't fully developed yet. And the universe, in its infinite wisdom, knows that if it were easy to be with these people, you would never be forced to develop these qualities internally. You would be content to admire them from the outside, project them onto others, without ever doing the internal work of integrating them into your own personality. The impossibility is what creates the necessary pressure for growth to happen from the inside out, authentically and permanently. This doesn't diminish the pain of these encounters. It doesn't make the suffering less real or less valid. On the contrary, it recognizes that pain is proportional to the importance of the transformation being offered. The deeper the person's impact on you, the greater the opportunity for growth, and consequently the greater the initial pain of not being able to have them. But there's something almost magical that happens when you finally accept and embrace this dynamic. When you stop fighting against impossibility and start working with it. When you stop rebelling against destiny and start collaborating with the growth process being offered. The pain doesn't disappear immediately, but its quality changes. It stops being a pain that diminishes and victimizes to become a sacred pain. A pain that honors the magnitude of the experience and growth it provided. You begin to look at these people with gratitude instead of resentment. Not forced gratitude or superficial spirituality, but genuine recognition that they gave you a gift greater than any traditional relationship could offer. They forced you to grow, to know yourself, to develop aspects of yourself that might have remained dormant forever if things had been easy. And then something extraordinary begins to happen. You discover you no longer need them to access what they awakened in you. The qualities you admired in them now are part of who you are. The sensitivity you sought in her now pulses within your own heart. The strength you looked for in him now sustains your own steps. You didn't lose anything. You gained everything. Future relationships have a completely different quality, because you can now distinguish between authentic connection and unconscious projection. You can love deeply without losing your identity. You can give yourself without abandoning yourself. You can recognize kindred spirits without becoming obsessed with them. The capacity to love actually expands, but becomes more mature, more conscious, less neurotic. If you're going through this now, if there's someone in your life who awakens deep feelings but remains unattainable, I want you to know, you're not being punished by the universe. You're being educated by it. You're not being rejected by life. You're being called to a deeper level of existence. The person you can't have isn't a cruelty of fate. It's a mirror of your own soul, reflecting aspects of you that are asking to be developed, integrated, made conscious. The pain you feel is real and valid, but it's not permanent and it's not without purpose. It's the pain of growth, the pain of transformation, the pain of dormant aspects of your soul awakening to life. And like all growth pain, it eventually transforms into strength, into wisdom, into an expanded capacity to love and be loved. Trust the process. Trust that there's an intelligence operating in your life that's greater than your current conscious understanding. Trust that you have the strength to get through this and emerge on the other side more whole, wiser, more capable of true love than you've ever been before. And always remember, you're not being deprived of someone who should be yours. You're being directed to find within yourself everything you were seeking in that person. If this video touched something deep in you, if you recognized your own journey in these words, leave in the comments the phrase, "I trust life's process." That way I'll know the message reached where it needed to reach, and that you understood that not every impossibility is a denial. Some are invitations to become who you really came here to be. And if you want to deepen this journey of transformation through pain and self-knowledge even further, I have something special for you. I created 2 ebooks that can be your companions in this process of healing and growth. The first is 21 Days of Transformation with Carl Jung, a practical guide that will take you through the most powerful techniques Jung developed for individuation and self-knowledge. For 21 days, you'll work with specific exercises to integrate your shadow, dialogue with your unconscious, and transform these impossible experiences into deep wisdom. It's like having Jung as your personal therapist, guiding you step by step through the process of becoming who you really are. The second is the Soul Survival Manual with Carl Jung's teachings. Because I know that when you're going through an impossible love, some days are simply hard to get through. This manual contains practical strategies, based on depth psychology, to navigate through the most challenging moments of the journey. These are tools you can use when the pain seems unbearable, when longing tightens its grip, when you question whether you'll be able to transform this into growth. The links are pinned in the first comment of the video. Thank you for staying with me until here, for having the courage to look your pain in the face and transform it into wisdom. What you're living through will pass, but the person you're going to become through this experience, that will stay forever. See you in the next video. Take care of yourself.